Hi, I'm Brian Russell, and I want to talk about why ongoing spiritual formation is absolutely critical for seminarians as well as for pastors and spiritual leaders. And you might think that's a no-brainer, but in my experience, I've found that this message isn't quite as obvious as you might expect it to be. Because one of the dilemmas, and there's two essentially dilemmas, or you might say ways that persons paint themselves in a corner spiritually, or they have really two mistaken mindsets. The first one, and I learned this from reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer's work on the fall, and he has a really interesting take on that conversation between Adam and Eve and the serpent, where the serpent says, "Did God really say?" And Bonhoeffer really wisely names that as the first conversation about God. And that word "about" is really critical, right? Because one of the things that can happen in our lives, whether we're students of the Bible, reading the Bible for a class, or reading the Bible for a sermon, or praying for someone else, is we mistake having conversations about God and thoughts about God for actually cultivating a relationship with God. So one of the dangers is objectifying God and forgetting that God is ultimately the subject of our lives. And that relates to a second thing, which is the mistaking our identity as persons loved by God, in persons who love God, in mistaking and substituting our role as pastors, spiritual leaders, public proclaimers, or readers of the scriptures, or persons who do pastoral care, but mistaking our identity for our role. And if you live simply out of your role, or if you live simply talking about God, you can appear really religious and spiritual, but slowly over time, we're actually deforming ourselves. So I created this video just to remind everyone of lessons that I've had to learn over the course of my life, is that it's critical that we create and honor a plan for cultivating that deep dive spirituality with God by setting up patterns, habits, spiritual rhythms, some people would call it a rule of life, that allow us simply to deepen our growth in grace. One of my favorite quotations comes from a pastor, the last name of McShane, from the 19th century, and he said, "My people's greatest need," how would you finish that sentence? "My people's greatest need." Well, for McShane, it was this: "My people's greatest need is my personal holiness." So friends, what are you doing to cultivate your deep relationship with God, so that God's love continues to flow in you as a person loved by God, and we allow God's love and grace then to transform us into persons that love God and then are able to love others? It all begins with our personal commitment to spiritual formation. And I would also just add, it's really helpful in your personal spiritual formation to also find a small group of like-minded persons. This may not even be the people that you're serving, but these are persons that come into your life that they're peers, or actually they could even be mentors that are on the same journey and are going to encourage your personal spiritual formation. Again, if you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.